My name is Sarah Lamb, and I'm actually the principal here at Summit High School. And again, I want to thank you for spending your time with us tonight. We've decided just in the last couple of years, the issues we've been dealing with young people in our area and across the district, that we wanted to reach out to the families and try to provide you with some information and resources, and also some sort of panel discussion. So our purpose tonight is just to begin a conversation as a community, as you can see on the screen, to address the issues that teens and young people are facing and how they impact their life at home and at school. We want to share resources and action steps to continue to provide support to these students and the families during this pivotal time. So at this time, I'm going to introduce some of the staff that is here tonight. Here at the school, as I said, I'm the principal here at Summit. I have 3 assistant principals. Ms. Fisher, she can wave. She's actually running the PowerPoint in the back for me. Jewel Mason, who's towards the back. Dr. Mason, if you'll wave. And then Scott Summerlin, who's actually home with his children tonight. He had to watch them. Our assistant principals, we're divided by alphabet. So if you attend our school, if your student has the last names A through G, they work with Dr. Mason. H through N, they work with Mr. Summerlin. And O through Z, they work with Ms. Fisher. And we take care of all those things in relation to that alphabet, if it's attendance, grades, any kind of discipline, or any kind of issues that the students might be having. So if you have any questions for us tonight, we're happy to answer those. I also have a full counseling staff, and I'm actually going to introduce our counseling department chair, who will introduce some other members of our staff that are here tonight, and she is Joyce Hollins.
Hi, I am Joyce Hollins, and I'm one of our now 5 counselors that we have in the counseling office at Summit. I'm the freshman counselor, so I'm the counselor for all of the freshmen. And then the rest of our counselors are divided by alphabet, just like the administrators. So Mr. Sharp is actually here in the back tonight. He'll wait. He's our counselor for students 10th through 12th grade with last names A through G. Mr. Sanders is our counselor for 10th through 12th grade students with last name H through N. And Ms. Cook has students last names O through Z. And then this year, we actually were able to add another part-time counselor, and she works with an assigned caseload, mainly working with our kids that need an extra push to get across the stage for graduation, and so she has a specific assigned caseload. So we were excited to add another counselor to our group this year. School counselors, we work with students mainly to help with their academic needs, career and college readiness, and then also the social and emotional piece, which is what we're talking about tonight. So we receive referrals from parents, from other students, from teachers. When they have concerns with students, we may start working with them individually or in small groups. We also go into the classrooms and give presentations on various topics as well. And so we do talk with students about their social emotional needs. Because of our large caseloads and the time constraints that we have to be able to work with students, we can't provide therapy or anything like that for students. So we do have other resources in our own building that we can refer out to if they're needing something more than we can provide as school counselors. And then we can also refer out to the community as well. But Erica McMurtry is here tonight, and she's our STARS counselor, and she's going to come and tell you what she does for our students.
Hello, so as Joyce was just saying, I'm Erica McMurtry. I'm the STARS counselor here at Summit High School. So what I do here is I'm an extra person that helps the students with social and emotional issues that they may be facing. So I talk to students about everything under the sun possible. I meet with students individually. We also run groups, which we will get started after the break. And I do the prevention events in the school with my STARS student leadership team. So some examples of the prevention events that we put on are Red Ribbon Week, Prom Promise, Kick Butts Day. We bring in speakers for things like suicide prevention, mental health. So it's a little bit of a catch-all. How I get my students is I go off referrals. So I get referrals from any staff member in the building, I get referrals from parents, I get referrals from peers, and then I also get self-referrals. So kids can just come to my office literally anytime they want, preferably during study hall or lunch. But yeah, so that is my role essentially. And if I'm working with a student and it gets to a point where maybe they're needing more and I'm not able to provide that here at school, then I would refer them out to our school social worker for resources outside of the school. I think that sums me up. So going from that, I will go ahead and introduce our school social worker, Stacey Yates.
Okay, as mentioned earlier, I'm Stacey Yates. I'm the school social worker here. I have 5 schools that serve K through 12, so I pretty much have the feeder schools into Summit High. My office is here at Summit High. So I have Allendale Elementary, Bethesda Elementary, Chapman's Retreat Elementary, Spring Station Middle, and Summit High. There are 9 school social workers in the district. We all serve K through 12, and we all pretty much have a high school, and we serve all the elementary and middle schools that feed into that high school. So, my role is unique. It is referral on a referral basis, and I do get referrals just like the others from a variety of people. I get them from parents, I get them from teachers, administration, you name it. This is pretty much my go-to before I make any moves with any referral that I have. So just in case you guys are not familiar with this diagram, this is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so I always go off of this because every parent and every teacher want our kids to be at that top tier, that self-fulfillment needs level. And that's when they're reaching at they're working to their highest potential. But my concern is the only way they can get to that self-actualization point is if these other 4 levels of needs are met. So we do have kids that they may not have food. And so if they don't have food, you're not going to get their highest potential out of them. So sometimes I get a referral on that because we have some kids whose stomachs may be growling in the middle of a test. And once that stomach is growling, focus is gone, you can forget academics, they can't focus because they're hungry. And so those people that I work with and they've ever been in my office, I keep food in my office at all times just because I need the kids to be fed. So in addition to that, so with the psychological needs, there's also, water, warmth, rest, and rest. Oh my gosh. So many kids are not getting the recommended amount of rest due to academics, due to other obligations, whether it be sports or just life, work, and so many other things. And so even that, if they're not getting an adequate amount of good rest, guess what? We're not going to get to their highest potential. And that's just a basic need. So then the next level where it talks about security and safety, as a parent, we're going to feed our kids. We're going to, try to make sure they get enough sleep because we can send them to bed. Doesn't mean they're asleep, right? So it takes a little while for that. But then, are we creating a safe environment for them? Do they have a sense of security? And so, if those needs aren't being met, here again, you're not going to get their highest potential. Then that next one is a big one for me. Having a sense of belonging and having those love needs met. And that starts from home. And so that's why I link up between school, because a lot of what I do is outside of the classroom and it's outside of the home. But this stuff does come into the classroom and comes into the school building sometimes. So in order for our kids to be able to have healthy, because they have a relationship, but is it a healthy relationship? Is it a good relationship? Let's make sure we're building that at home. And so when they're bringing that to school, we're creating and raising decent human beings. Because sometimes that's just not what's going on sometimes, right? And I talk to the teachers about, do the kids feel like they belong here? Do the kids feel like they belong in your classroom? Do our kids even feel like they belong at home? Because unfortunately, sometimes parents can create a hostile environment for the kids, and sometimes school is their safest place. But as long as they're getting that on both ends, that is just phenomenal. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't happen, and then that's where I have to, see what I can do to help the parents support their kids, in addition to helping some of the educators support the kids as well. Then that next level of need, self-esteem, that's huge as well. And so you can have a kid who has food, has a place to stay, and have somewhat decent friends or friendships, but their self-esteem may be off. And so we have to be careful with what we are teaching our kids, what we're saying to our kids, because our kids can be very literal, very literal. And so it's important to engage our kids in and do those self-reflections and those self-checks with them to say, how's school going? How are you feeling about school? How are you feeling about your teachers? How are you feeling about friends? How's that going? Because sometimes they can say, everything's fine, and everything is not fine because your kids, right? Just a quick summary. These are pretty much the reasons that I get involved, because it is so important for a kid to be able to work to their fullest potential, just like it's important for us as adults to work to our fullest potential, right? And if we don't have these basic needs, our kids aren't going to have them. And if we're not modeling these things, how do our kids know what to model? But sometimes we do need help with those things, and that is completely okay. I'm smart, but I don't know everything sometimes, you know what I mean? So it is important to reach out to some resources that may be helpful into progression when it comes to a relationship with your child, or just a relationship with the school, and just a relationship with their teachers, and just, we're all collaborating together with meeting the needs of our kids, inside and out of school. And so I come in because I do a lot of the out of school stuff, even though I'm housed in the schools, because some of the stuff starts in a classroom or in the school. So that's pretty much summarizes that. You guys have any questions that you can think of?
So part tonight, we wanted to go over a few statistics. I won't read all of the statistics, but there's a couple of us that are going to go over some things, and these are some overarching issues that we have seen in the schools. Williamson County actually has a reporting, it's an email and a phone that you can actually call into and report if there's bullying or harassment. And so the statistics for last year, 2016 to 17, 119 students, and this is across the district, were reported bullying complaints, and only 70 of those actually resulted in some sort of discipline. So any parent in the district can call into that bullying hotline, and they can, or email it, and then they will divvy that out to the schools depending on what the nature of that is. And so we're going over that to show that a lot of times what we're dealing with is not always reported. And so we wanted to show that statistic. Also, some interesting statistics that we found on technology. We're dealing a lot with technology, social media, cell phones, laptops, tablets, all sorts of things. But these are some interesting things I thought. On average, children are 12 when they receive their first mobile device. 56% of children who are ages 8 to 12 have a cell phone. 53% of teenagers that are ages 13 to 17 say most of their phone calls last 4 minutes or less. 33% of teenagers who are 13 to 17 list texting as their favorite form of communicating with their friends. And if you're ever in our building during class change or lunchtime, if you walk down the hall, everyone's heads are down. And then 1 in 3 teens say that they feel more accepted online than they do in real life. And we deal a lot with that when it comes to social media and what is reality, what is said, and what is not said. So we thought those were interesting statistics. Erica's going to come up and talk about the STARS referrals for Williamson County.
So as I shared earlier, how I get my students that I work with is through referrals. So every month we do our monthly report and we talk about or submit in any new referrals, how many sessions I have with students, what type of sessions they were. So in a typical day I'll have an individual session with students, and that's someone that I see regularly. I have crisis situations where maybe it's a student I've seen before or not, they just show up and they need help in that moment. So those are my typical sessions. So as of right now, across Williamson County this school year, the first 3, you see the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, self-harm. Those are the reports of crisis sessions that have occurred over Williamson County for the STARS employees at this time. So see that the anxiety is clearly the highest at 401. Depression is 221, and then suicidal ideation and self-harm is 113. And unfortunately, this doesn't give an accurate picture because a lot of students, maybe they're scared to come, maybe they're scared of their parents finding out, and they know those are some things that we have to talk to parents about. So, you know, we're not even getting all the students that may be needing help because they're scared. As far as referrals that I have personally met with here at Summit, I put a comparison. So at this time last year, I was up to 87 referrals. And then this year, it's 106. So that has increased, and we have been feeling that over in the counseling department. And I do have an intern with me this year that has also been helping and meeting with students. So it's been a full caseload, and I think that's just it gives a good picture of how things have increased and what we're trying to do here at Summit and across Williamson County to help our students with their struggles.
As Erica was saying, sometimes it's hard to have true data and statistics for mental health because one of the challenges is we only know what has been diagnosed or what has been reported, and we know that there are many people walking around who may have mental illness who have not been diagnosed or has not been reported in some way. But Rolling Hills was kind enough to share some statistics with us on mental health, and 1 in 5 children ages 13 to 18 have or will have a serious mental illness. And the impact of that is that 50% of lifetime cases of mental illness begin by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 24. The average delay between onset and intervention is 10 years. And that was pretty surprising when I saw that, but also one of the reasons that we're here today. If we can increase awareness around these topics, hopefully more people will get the help they need sooner. Some more statistics for inpatient and outpatient from Rolling Hills. And these statistics are just from Rolling Hills. We also have students in the county that may go to Vanderbilt or Skyline or other psychiatric hospitals. And this is not divided out by county, but in 2016, the inpatient adolescents that they saw were 665, and right now they're on pace for 2017 to be at 811. So you can see that's a big difference in the 2 years, a pretty large increase. And then for outpatient adolescents, they had 130 in 2016, and in 2017 they're on pace for 168. So again, an increase, and my guess would be that the other psychiatric hospitals are seeing the same thing as well. And then suicide, Tennessee Suicide Prevention ARC is here tonight, and they'll be giving you some more information a little bit later. But suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24 in the United States. Every day, 14 people die by suicide. That's about 1 in every 2 hours. 53% of young people who die by suicide have abused drugs or alcohol, and drugs and alcohol continue to be an issue for adolescents, so that's important to note. Males are 4 times more likely than females to die by suicide. The reason for that is the method that they choose tend to be more lethal than what females choose. And in the state of Tennessee, in 2014, 115 people between the ages of 10 and 24 died by suicide. In 2013, 1 in 11 high school students surveyed admitted that they attempted suicide in the past year. And also in 2013, a survey of students in grades 9 through 12, 15.2% reported seriously considering suicide in the past year. And we wanted to be able to share these statistics just to kind of paint the broad picture for you, to know that these issues exist and we want to be able to talk about them. They impact us here in our school, they impact us in the county, they impact us statewide. It's a pretty broad impact. So, but we wanted to be able to start this conversation today, and so hopefully some of those statistics paint a good broad picture for you. Ms. Lamb's going to come up and talk about some of our school policies related to some of these issues.
So one of the things we also wanted to do tonight was provide you with some of the information about Williamson County policies, and this is the case in all of our schools. You can, and we will share this PowerPoint on our website after tonight, so you can go back and refer to it if you'd like. Board Policy 6.3032 addresses bullying, and that's one of the things that all schools are dealing with right now and seems to be on the rise. And I won't claim to be an expert, but we have Roger Dinwiddie here with us tonight, who's the CEO of STARS, and he definitely is that expert, so I know he's going to go into more things. But bullying and bullying-related behaviors, and that includes cyberbullying, which is one of the things that we're dealing with, intimidation, hazing, and harassment, and are unacceptable behaviors in our district and strictly prohibited and not tolerated. Students are found to be acting in a violation of this policy shall be subject to discipline, can go anywhere from suspension up to expulsion. So what we're looking at is, are students physically harming a student or damaging a student's property? We're looking at knowing and placing the student or students in reasonable fear or physical harm to the student or damage to the student's property. Are they causing emotional distress due to the students or creating a hostile educational environment? So when we receive a report of bullying, whether it's from a student, it's from a parent, or just a bystander or someone, it is amazing in our community. People will call all the time and say, hey, I've seen this occurring, which is great. And then we begin our investigation process. Also on the screen you can see the hazing. It's defined by Tennessee law. That has to do with the reckless and intentionally endangers the mental health or physical health and safety of students. And so that's something else that we would look into. Once the report has been brought to our attention, sometimes that's by email, sometimes that's by social media. I've had people reach out to me on social media about different issues. Sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it is the bullying hotline and tip line that I mentioned earlier. And so either the principal or the assistant principal within 48 hours of receiving the report will investigate. I will tell you, I've not worked in every school, but I know most school administrators, we do not take 48 hours to investigate anything. But we do begin our investigation. We do by policy have that 48 hours. At this time we're trying to evaluate the merit of that report. And Roger will get into this, what is the difference between bullying and somebody being mean, and that's usually some of the things we're trying to tease out when we receive that report. Following the investigation, no later than 20 calendar days from the date of the report, the principal or the assistant principal will initiate any interventions that are needed or that are appropriate. Sometimes that has to do with making a referral to STARS, that could be working with our school counselors, that could be working with parents, that could be a mediation between students if necessary. Also could involve discipline as well. And then make available to the students, again, those counseling services or any outside resources that may be necessary. We will also notify parents of all the parties involved and let them know of any supports that we feel are necessary or that are available due to what event has occurred. Also on the screen we have the WCS bullying tip line. There, like I said, there's a phone number and there is an email address. We are also rolling out second semester. We are rolling out an anonymous tip line on Summit's website. We are finding a lot of times we're hearing from students that they do not want to report because they don't want to be a snitch. And we know that that filters all the way down to elementary school. I've got 2 children myself, elementary and middle, and I hear those words a lot. And so we're going to try to roll this out. One of the other things that Summit is doing is we're creating a student advisory council. We're in the process right now of creating that. Students are being referred by teachers. We want all walks of life, not the straight A students, not necessarily the athletes, just a good mixture of kids, so that we can get a pulse on what's going on, at least in our school. And we're going to roll out that anonymous tip line to them as well so they can start passing that word along. But that will be on our website right after Christmas break. Another one of the policies that we're working with because we're seeing issues from is the BYOT policy. So if you've been in Williamson County for a while, you know that students can bring their own technology to school all the way down to elementary school. And so it is, in our school especially, and I believe it's probably true in most schools, once a student crosses into a classroom, that is the teacher's domain. And so they can set those rules on what that technology looks like. And so we obviously are pushing for students to use this educationally. Students will, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Google Classroom now, and so students are on that 24/7 because teachers are posting assignments, asking them to respond. We use them for Poll Everywhere, which is like a survey they can take in class if they're answering a question. We want to use those for educational purposes, but the reason I bring BYSU up, because we've actually had discussions about this in our principals meeting lately, is how appropriate is that right now? Because students are sometimes abusing those technology policies. So every school has a policy on if you're misusing that technology, and I know at Summit High School we do, so if you're misusing your technology in some way, there's a tier of discipline that we use. We are trying to teach students to be digitally good citizens, because that's the way of the world. I mean, I have my phone at all times. I think most of you probably do too. And so we want to teach them that there's appropriate ways to use them, and they can be useful. But we don't want to use them for the bullying or the harassment or something that's inappropriate during class time or any other time. So we bring that up to say that, yes, we do allow technology in school, and we're trying to teach them to use that appropriately, and when discipline is necessary, that is taken care of. And so one of the other WCS policies is Joyce is going to go over is our policy and how we handle suicide prevention.
So the biggest piece with students who have active thoughts of suicide is that we are going to immediately get the family involved. So once we have knowledge that a student is having suicidal thoughts, we will notify the parent and ask them to come to the school to take the student home. The reason behind this, number one, is the student's safety. We need to make sure that they're safe and that they're supervised. And it's hard for us at school to make sure that they're getting the supervision that they need so that they're not causing harm to themselves at school. We will also meet with the family, and we can help with referrals if necessary, but a student may need to either go see a doctor or a therapist, or maybe have an assessment done to determine what it is that they are needing to make sure that they are safe from themselves. So this may result in inpatient or outpatient treatment of some sort. Another piece that is important to us is that depending on the student's needs, we may require a documentation from a mental health professional for clearance for them to return to school. And this again is all for safety purposes. We want to make sure that the student is safe. And I know a lot of parents have a lot of stress around their student being out of school and missing work while they're gone. And our number one priority is their safety. And so we will help you. We will help your student figure out the rest. But we want to make sure that they're safe. And like Stacy was saying, with the hierarchy of needs, they're not going to be able to focus in the classroom if they are having thoughts of suicide. So we need to make sure that they're getting help in that area first, and then be able to take care of them here at school. So when they do return to school, we want the parents to come in and have a meeting with us so that we can make sure that we have a good safety plan in place for the student if they are to have any additional suicide thoughts, or for us to know what their triggers are and what their coping skills are, for us to be able to communicate with any therapist or community agency that they may have spent time with, so that we can all work together to come up with a really good plan for the student. So that's how we handle suicidal ideation in the school. At this time, we're going to invite our guest panel to come to the stage, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. But with us tonight, we have, and you can all just go ahead and make your way. We have Will Allen and Stacy Moore from Rolling Hills Hospital. Allison Clanton, who is a local licensed clinical social worker Roger Dinwiddie, who is the CEO of Stars Nashville, Joanne Purley with Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, Jonathan Berry is a school resource officer, and Stacy Yates is our school social worker who you have already met. We'll give them a chance to get situated.
My name is Will Allen. I'm from Rolling Hills Hospital in the Spring Hill area. I have around 10 years of mental health, inpatient psychiatric.
Not in order for you to have light, we can't do light up though.
10 years of, okay, 10 years of inpatient psychiatric experience. Hello? So 10 years of psychiatric hospital experience. I've spent several years in our hospital fielding community crisis calls. So I have a lot of experience in that, and I'm able to spread the word of our hospital now. And as anyone will agree with me, it's about having options. And so I'm able to provide at least an option of our hospital, whether that be inpatient or outpatient services. But I'm always quick to refer you to someone in the area that can serve you best and can serve you quickest. And if we're not able to do that, I definitely want you to get the quickest help that you can. So I really appreciate Joyce for inviting me to come in today to for this.
Hi. Hello. Hi, my name is Stacey Moore. I am a licensed clinical social worker and the director of, it doesn't like, and the director of clinical services at Rolling Hills Hospital. I had the pleasure of working with Will over here for the last 5 years, but I have never. This one work? There we go. Okay. I have worked for the One more time. There we go. All right. I am the Director of Clinical Services at Rolling Hills Hospital. I have been there for the last 8 years and have had the pleasure of working on the inpatient side with the adolescent unit that serves 13 and up. And of course have treated and worked with the families and the adolescents who, of course, are suffering and dealing with the issues that bring us here tonight. So I am extremely happy and thrilled to be a part of it. I am a Spring Hill resident, and so, of course, this is very near and dear to my heart. So again, thank you for having us here, so we can all join in on this.
Keep pulling it. Hi, I'm Roger Dinwiddie, and I'm CEO, Executive Director and CEO at Stars Nashville. We've been involved with Williamson County Schools since 1986. First school at Brentwood High School, and have people like Erica who work in the schools doing direct work with young men and women who have issues that are affecting their ability to be successful in the classroom. Personally, I worked in juvenile court for 5 years in Nashville, taught for about 7 in Nashville, and then I've been with Stars since 1986 as the first full-time executive director and CEO of Stars. I'm an educator by training. I've had the pleasure of doing a whole lot of things in my career. I get to train a lot, work with a lot of school systems. We consult in with the Tennessee Department of Education quite a bit. And related to the issue of bullying prevention, I just finished my tenure as the immediate past president of the International Bullying Prevention Association, where I've been a member for about 10 years of that board. And that probably is one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, to see the changes that have really occurred in the field of bullying prevention over the course of the last 10 years. So I'm glad to be here. I want to appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the panel. Look forward to hearing what everybody's got to say and to your questions.
We got Cora coming everywhere. Okay, cool. My name is Joanne Purley. I'm the Middle Tennessee Regional Coordinator with the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network. I'm really glad to be able to be with y'all this evening. I have lots of good resources. You saw my table. There's lots of stuff. Please take it all. I don't want to take any of it back to Nashville. We'll get to that here later. I am myself I grew up in Columbia, went to Spring Hill High School. I'm sorry. It was the only one that was there at the time. I'm really glad to see a lot of your faces. I know a lot of you don't remember me, but I know a lot of the faces in this room. So teachers in the world, glad to see you. Really looking forward to answering your questions, and please pick my brain, okay?
Good evening. I'm Allison Clanton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Spring Hill. I have a private practice with several colleagues where we treat children and families and couples and adult individuals who might be struggling with a variety of problems of life. And I'm really glad you're here. It's more important to me that you're here than those of us, just the interest that you have in trying to help children and families in our community. A little about my perspective as I answer questions and talk tonight is, for about 4 years, I worked with juvenile offenders in a boot camp aftercare program in Fresno, California. And it was amazing, and me Espanol and Hmong and all kinds of languages improved and cultural diversity grew, and it was great. But the downside of that work was that I was coming in at the end of all the struggle. And so after 4 years of that, I became really disheartened, and I heard of a grant where I could learn about infant and preschool mental health, and that sounded cool. Maybe I can get in and begin working with families early, and we can start to shift things earlier. And so I come from an attachment perspective, so my special interest is in the area of improving relationships between people. I feel really strongly about that. And so I've since become certified in several various attachment interventions, and I use those to help children and their families connect to work through depression or anxiety or just troubled relationships or bullying or whatever it is. And so I love working on relationships, and I'm happy to develop relationships with you guys if you have any questions after. Thanks.
Hello guys. Hello. My name's Sergeant Barry with the Williamson County Sheriff's Department. I'm the Zone 3 supervisor. I oversee all the schools in the Spring Hill Thompson Station area. That includes some high school, Spring Station, and all the schools in this area, including College Grove and Longview Elementary and Bethesda. Your officer here is Deputy Rob Lenders, and I supervise him. He comes to you guys with several years of experience from Franklin PD. To say thank you for letting me be here tonight. I look forward to all your questions.
And I'm back. It's me again. And the reason I am up here, because like I said, you guys know I deal with the outside stuff, but last year I received 151 referrals, and all but 19 were mental health related. So pretty much the way the system or the cycle kind of goes in a school is that if a kid is in a classroom saying, hey, I'm having a hard time, I can't do this, all right, most likely the teacher's going to send that student to the counseling center. And so sometimes they will meet with their assigned school counselor, they will meet with the STARS counselor. Sometimes if I'm available, I know I have 5 schools, but sometimes I'm here, sometimes they will meet with me. And we will assess the student to see, is the student okay? Can we talk to the kid? Can we help the kid process what's going on and get that kid back to class? Unfortunately, there are some instances where we can't get that kid back to class. So what are our next steps? And we have to go to the next step, because the thing is, we will be doing that kid an injustice if we send that kid back to class and force that kid to try to tough it out in class. That's just unfair. So 9 times out of 10, the parent will be called. Unfortunately, sometimes the parent has to come and pick up a kid, and then we have to have a next step. Sometimes just picking up the kid and going home, that's not going to fix this, because I don't want this to happen again the next day. So we have to get to the bottom of what happened to this kid, because a lot of times it's not what's wrong with the kid, it's what's happened to a kid. And a lot of times, due to whatever snitching parameters or whatever, they don't want to talk about it. But it's eaten them alive inside, and it's gotten them this far to where they're really in a hurtful place. So a lot of times I am contacted because I refer them out, and then that's where Rolling Hills, you know, and some of the other outside resources come into play, because as mentioned earlier, we're not therapists, but we are here to be as much of a social emotional support as we can possibly. And so sometimes when a kid does go, if it gets that tough for them and they have to go to a mental health facility, and they are evaluated by an adolescent psychiatrist, and they work with licensed clinical social workers or clinical psychologists to get to the bottom of what's going on. Sometimes there are diagnoses, sometimes there's not. There is a such thing as situational depression, and there's a such thing as underlying, like, continual depression and anxiety. And we have to get to the bottom of why these kids are feeling anxious, why are these kids feeling depressed, and why are these kids even getting to the point where they feel like even wanting to hurt themselves. And so when we do hit the point where they go and they're possibly checked into a mental health facility, they will work with them extensively to get them into a better place, to the point where they are able to return to school. And that's a big parameter for us, and it's so imperative for us to collaborate and work together, because once a kid comes back to school, we want to make sure that we're supporting the kid, because are there triggers at school? Is there something at the school that caused that kid to have a panic attack, or just to have a meltdown, or just for that kid to feel uncomfortable at all? And what could we do together to support that kid to possibly remove some of those triggers, or to, you know, does this kid do have days for a while? And yes, we talk about schoolwork. Schoolwork is the last thing on my mind. I just want to get them to a place where they feel good about themselves again. They just feel good, period, about life. And so then our teachers, I have to say, guys, I have met with some wonderful teachers that are very patient with working with kids academically to get them back on track. And so at the end of the day, we don't want schoolwork to cause them to trigger anxiety again, because sometimes, you know, schoolwork can be an anxiety thing. So once we collaborate with the parents and the student, we like to do that prior to them even going back into the classroom, so that the kid knows what to expect when they walk back into the classroom. And so we just try to keep that social emotional support intact for the student as long as they need it. The goal is to kind of wean ourselves away to where they don't need us as much, but we're definitely there as long as they need us, for sure. And if they're okay, then all of a sudden a month later, hey, I'm not feeling okay again, all right, back to the counseling center, and let's get that support back in place. So that's pretty much how I'm involved a lot with the mental health. And then some kids, they may not have to go to the point of being evaluated or going to a mental health facility. Maybe they just need counseling. And so I meet with a lot of therapists in the area locally, and I like to get to know them, because it takes to have, you gotta have a good match. Because some counselors may not work for your kids, and some will. And so that's where I come in. I have an abundant amount of knowledge. I'm always in the community. That's just what I do pretty much almost 24/7. But I do like to get to know our counselors, just to make sure they're going to help meet our students' needs, and they're actually going to be effective in meeting those needs.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, so for our panel discussion, we wanted to start tonight with the topic of bullying. And so our first question is going to go to Mr. Dinwiddie, and we would like for you to define bullying for us. And if you could talk a little bit both about the differences between bullying and being mean and those differences, and then also what some of the national trends are. Sorry.
I'm sorry for y'all. Sorry for y'all too. Well, you know, there was an expert panel that the Center for Disease Control put together about, it's probably about 5 years ago now. And it was a whole bunch of experts in the field. And it took them 2 years to define what bullying was. And you might say, well, the reason it took them 2 years because it was a panel of experts. So that may be part of the problem. But one of the realities is bullying is a really complex issue. Anyone who tries to sell the issue that it's somehow a simple definition is misleading. Bullying is a complex issue, so let me start here and say the first thing is everything's not bullying. And that, I think, you know, as a parent, you guys know that. There are some normal things developmentally that young men and women deal with in terms of understanding the necessity of resilience, communication, etc. But what bullying is essentially 4 things. And I'm not going to give you the big, long CDC definition. You can look that up. What's important to remember are these 4 attributes. Bullying, first of all, involves a repetitious behavior. Second, it involves an issue where there is an intent to cause harm. Third, it involves a power imbalance, which is not a legally defensible term, but it is a practical definition of what bullying involves. But you can't charge somebody with an imbalance of power. But the point of that is that bullying is a form of peer abuse, which you can charge someone with, especially when it comes to what we would look at in the adult world of domestic abuse, of physical abuse, and sexual abuse, which are all crimes of an imbalance of power. So from a defensible point here, bullying is those 3 things plus one more critical, and that is the issue of causing terror in someone's life. You know, the worst part about bullying is if you're in a 7th grade classroom and you've got to go to gym in a few minutes and you don't know when that bullying's happening, the worst thing in your life is not knowing when or where bullying will occur, but you know it will, or you have a pretty high likelihood that it will. That's why terror, as Barbara Colarasso adds it to her definition, is such an important attribute. Conflict happens every day. Anybody married in here? I'm just checking, okay? Well, then you don't need any more explanation about conflict, okay? Anybody have children in here? Conflict. Everybody has conflict every day. If you avoid conflict, you need to come on up and join a panel, okay? Because life is filled with conflicts. The difference between bullying and conflict is bullying has nothing to do with conflict because of what I just shared. Conflict is inevitable. It happens all the time. The difference substantially between bullying and conflict is very, very important, and that is this. If there's a conflict, it's pretty likely that if we had a conflict up here, we would try to resolve it. With bullying, there's no desire on the part of the person who bullies to resolve the issue. Fundamentally, bullying is an issue of an absence of empathy, which is the important attribute. It's not an issue of low self-esteem because most kids who are identified as bullies suffer from average or above average self-esteem, which is an important myth in the field of bullying. And last but not least is this. The trends about bullying, the good news is, regardless of what everybody hears in the media, the trends of bullying are actually down in terms of reports across the United States of America and Europe. And that includes cyberbullying. So let me just close it with this. Most kids in my life and in our work at STARS, and y'all know this too up here, try to use the internet and try to use their texting abilities appropriately. It's the kids who don't that create the havoc for everybody. About 80% of kids in the United States of America use their technology appropriately. That is a huge knowledge-based statistic. About 80% of kids use their technology appropriately. Tragically, the ones who don't create a lot of havoc and an unnecessary chaos for everybody else. Bullying, generally about 15 to 16% of kids in America report either being a victim or bullying themselves. So that kind of gives you the stats.
I'm going to use my teacher voice so we don't have to take the microphone. So this is for Officer Berry. What does bullying look like in school, whether it's in person, social media, or technology? What's the impact does bullying have on students in schools?
Well, the impact is great on students because it affects their ability to focus and study in class, which is the main reason they're at school. But what it looks like when my officers are reporting, what they see now, and what my officers report to their administration is, we're seeing more teasing and name calling nowadays, as opposed to physical hitting and slapping. But the biggest thing that we're having trouble with, recently in the past 6 weeks, I would say since around October, is cell phone and social media things. And what makes that so hard to deal with in the school is that sometimes that these actions take place away from the school building. But what happens on Monday morning is they come to school, they see so-and-so in the hallway. Oh, did you hear about what she did this weekend? Or did you hear about what he did this weekend? Then it disrupts our school day. And then we have a whole situation of kids coming out of class to come to the counselor's office to talk about it, and rightfully so, they should. But that stuff spills over. So, you know, the trends aren't as what officers see, what they're reporting to me and their other sergeants. It's more teasing and name calling, and the social media is becoming a real issue in our schools.
So how should students be responding to bullying?
First and foremost, they should report it. And get themselves to a safe situation and report it to an adult. I tell my officers when they speak to their kids, and my officers are in the school, they're, you know, contrary to belief, they're not there to get kids in trouble. There's a resource. There's a resource to the school. If they act out of line, we will take care of that, of course. But the first thing they can do is report it to adult. If they report it to my officers will go to the administration, report it, and then they'll take care of it from there. Hopefully they're reporting to you guys at home, and your parents are noticing it. You notice things, changes in their grades, or just, hey, I don't want to go to school today. Well, why? Well, I don't feel good. You know, doesn't feel good turns into 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and there's a reason for that. It's because, like Mr. Dinwiddie said, is that fear. If I'm going to see that guy in the locker room, they're going to make fun of me for the shoes I have or the shoes that I don't have. So I would say reporting it is the first step that has to be done. And then our school system, which I worked in 3 school systems. I worked in Murray County, Franklin Special, and Williamson County. I will say Williamson County School System by far does a tremendous job at investigating and trying to solve the situation, take care of it.
May I have one more comment to that, and I couldn't agree more. Let me just say there's a great project that was done several years ago by Stan Davis and Sharice Nixon called the Youth Voice Project. And this is what young people said, a huge survey of young people across the country. And when asked the question, so what can young people do to address the issue? The first response was, tell somebody, okay? Secondly was, I told a friend about it, so make sure, back to the attachment issue, there are great relationships amongst young men and women. And then the other ones were really interesting. Make a joke about it, but an internal joke, not an external joke at the person who's harming them, because that often leads to more harm. Told an adult at school, reminded myself, and this one's really important, that this is not my fault. I didn't bring this on, I did not deserve this. And then the last couple was, and this was really important at the high school level only, the most helpful strategy was, pretend that it didn't bother me, but later make sure you tell somebody, because that's really critical to the process. And then the least helpful strategies, ended enough, was told the person how I felt. Well, that's not something that most kids who bully others really care very much about, so using iMessages and things like that are probably inappropriate. And then the last couple was, the least effective was, I told the person, this is interesting, told the person or people to stop, because it often exacerbates the problem. And then the very last, and maybe the one that we all need to remember, is fighting back. Is really not one of the outcomes that tends to work very well for young people when it comes to strategies that really work. I think the last point too, and then I'll be quiet, is one of the things that we need to be cautious of is putting too much focus on bystander behavior to solve this problem. Fundamentally, a power imbalance problem is an adult problem for young people, whether they're elementary school or high school. And then last but not is not looking at bystanders to be saviors, to step up and fix this whole issue every time it happens. Because we're asking young men and women to do some complex things that many of us as adults struggle with in terms of speaking up in a workplace. So we need to keep it real in terms of our expectations.
Thank you. Well, so I appreciate you sharing ways that students can respond to bullying, because we know that if they don't know how to respond to bullying, that there is the potential for bullying to cause some trauma. And so, Ms. Clanton, I was hoping that you could tell us about your definition of trauma and how you see trauma impacting children and teens today. And not necessarily just with bullying, but with other things as well.
Sure. So, my definition of trauma is an experience that a person goes through that causes significant emotional distress. So it could be a physical experience, like a really bad car accident, or getting, a concussion, a serious concussion, something of that nature. Or it could be, obviously, physical abuse, but it could also be an emotionally distressful event where you feel humiliated, completely embarrassed. It's an experience that we go through that triggers our fight, flight, or freeze response in our brain, which is not anything that we can control. It's the way our brains are hardwired from the very beginning. And so in trauma, it's different than going through a hard time. I want you to think about it this way. All of you, whether you drive yet or not, you have a familiar way that you go most days, right? A road that you take to school every day, okay? And you go down that road every day. You could almost go that way with your eyes closed, right? And so a bad experience is like we're going down that road just like we did yesterday, but there's a wreck, so you have to take a detour. But the next day, we go down the road, and there's no wreck or detour, and we go along our way. It's a bad experience. Who wants to take a detour, right? Or on our way to the same place every day, we have a fender bender, or our car breaks down. Bummer. But the next day, our car is fixed, or there's no fender bender, and we go right along our merry way. That's a bad experience. Versus trauma, you're going down the same road you've gone down every day, and you're driving along, and there has been an explosion that has caused damage to the road where you will never go down that road ever again. It's done. Or if it's not done forever, it's done for a long time. And the detour you have to take to get to school now is going to take you 30 extra minutes down a treacherous, curvy road, and you're terrified. How will I ever get there on time? How do I know this is the right way? This does not look familiar. It's taking me away from where I've always gone. So that's the difference between trauma and just bad experiences. Now, someone mentioned the word resiliency, right? So some people go through traumatic experiences and they don't seem to be fazed by it. We all have different resiliency factors, right? Just the way our brains are hardwired, the way our personality is, the stability or lack of stability in our home, whether or not we have medical conditions that are making life uncomfortable on just a regular basis. There's a whole lot that affects our ability to be resilient in the face of a bad or traumatic experience. So, but if it is trauma, often a person initially will be in shock or in denial about what they've gone through. And then as time goes on, they still may have intrusive memories or flashbacks about the bad experience. They may have nightmares related to or not about the bad experience. They may have significant emotional dysregulation where 1 minute they're fine and then it feels like their mood just completely swings out of nowhere. Or things that used to not bother them, maybe certain sounds or certain songs or whatever, all of a sudden evoke a feeling that it used to not cause. And so in trauma, one of the impacts of it is, you remember the road, you have to take a different route. Children and adults begin to live life differently afterwards. Life's not the same afterwards. I have to engage with people differently. I have to take care of myself differently. Life changes after trauma if you aren't getting help or doing something to heal from the trauma. There is a study that is going to be rolling out, and I challenge you to go online and look it up, parents. If you have your phone, jot down the ACEs study, ACES. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and you're going to be hearing more about it, but it's a long-term study that's looking at the impact of bad experiences in childhood. Some of the experiences obviously are traumas, but divorce is on that list, right? Children experience, lots of children, not all, but lots of children experience divorce as traumatic. Lots of children experience emotional abuse as trauma. So long-term illness, if a child has a long-term physical illness, that can be experienced as trauma. So the more bad experiences we have, the more long-term problems those tend to cause, both physically, academically, relationally, all kinds of problems. But if you're a parent in this room or a teacher and you're trying to know, is this child traumatized or are they just going through a hard time? Some things to look for would be, are they waffling, are they going back and forth between trying to numb themselves, maybe with substances, maybe with sexual acting out, with gaming addictions. They were on their screens a lot, but now that's all they do. We don't see their face anymore. They go between trying to numb and trying to feel, either by overeating or overacting out in physical ways, or and self-harming, cutting or other kinds of self-harming things. Another impact of trauma would be kids either go to an extreme of hiding their true selves. It's like they withdraw and they don't want anybody to see them, so they don't ever get hurt again. They don't have to go through anything. They pull back. Or they go the opposite direction and they kind of exaggerate who they are and they experiment with being different ways, because maybe if I take control of the situation, this won't happen to me again. So if you see any of those extremes, troubled relationships, so when you don't feel right, when you when the brain, neural pathways, the pathway in your brain is now changed, you have to take that different road, right, to get to where you used to go, then you don't relate to people the same way that you used to, so you see a lot of arguing, a lot of anxiety just about everything, where they used to be pretty confident and going through, engaging with others pretty easily. And then the last thing I want you to consider is, untreated, and this is for you. The impact of our children going through trauma is that trauma breeds trauma. Not in that a child who is traumatized is then going to turn into a bully. That's not what I'm saying. But when we go through a trauma and it's not addressed, then eventually these impacts that I just spoke of will create trauma in relationships with you in the room. You see your child go through things, and experiencing this with your child can be traumatic for you. So those would be, and then that affects how you are in the community and your other relationships as well.
Thank you. This question is for whoever on the panel would like to answer. We have seen an increase in the number of students dealing with anxiety and depression over the last few years. In your experience, and I know we could talk at length, but briefly, what are some of the most common factors contributing to the high levels of anxiety and depression in our children and adolescents?
Some things that I thought about in terms of contributing factors would be kids having unrealistic expectations placed upon them, either by their peers, who want them or want to put them in a box and to put them in a certain group, or think of them, see them a certain way, and there's a lot of peer pressure that way, or unrealistic expectations from us as adults, where we want to see them achieve to their fullest potential, so we over-engage them maybe in things that they don't want to keep that full of a schedule, or they don't want to keep playing that sport or whatever, they don't care to have 100% straight A's. It's good enough for them to be A, B, but when they feel like unrealistic expectations are placed upon them. Another contributing factor is what Stacy mentioned earlier, not having a sense of belonging. And this is really tricky for all of us because of social media. We're connected, we're friends with so many people, but we're not really connected. We don't see their faces, we don't hear their voices enough. And so just not feeling a sense of where you really belong. And families, I'm speaking to myself, we're so busy, it's hard to have a sense of family togetherness and cohesiveness. And another factor I would say would be kids are really struggling to communicate what their needs are. Like, we don't slow down, we don't practice communicating how we're feeling really. Even though we communicate really quickly in lots of little posts and text interactions, but we don't really practice paying attention to ourselves and communicating what we need, or we seek inappropriate ways to get those needs met from people who just aren't able or are not really invested in us. So those are the factors I see.
Just to build a little bit more on that communication piece from an inpatient side, I would have to say that one of the largest things that we see is that communication piece. We have so many of the adolescents come in who literally have to, it seems, learn how to communicate all over again. Whether it be because of the social media, whether it be because if we go back to the beginning of the presentation with the introduction with the Maslow's hierarchy, every child from different spectrums of functioning, it could very easily be that they want so badly just to tell mom and dad they want to quit basketball. Or they want so badly to be able to talk to their best friend into starting a new activity with them. They just don't know how to communicate. And so what happens is that anxiety or that depression builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And rather than having learned and practiced different skills along the way of different ways of communicating, next thing you know, you have kiddo in the office saying, I don't know what to do anymore, I just want to kill myself. What we know about suicide is actually about pain. So communication, if we can practice those basic steps of communication even at home with the check-ins and the daily reflections, just basics, practice at the dinner table, those sort of things will go a long, long way. Even if at first we don't get the answers, and goes a long way. So that's the big thing that we see just on the inpatient side, is that communication.
And I'm gonna pass it since she was mentioning suicide. I'd like for Joanne to talk some about the risks of suicide, and also what are the warning signs that you as parents and community members should be aware of.
Hello, hi, there we go, hi. So I want to take a moment to apologize for your loss. I know that there has been a loss recently, and I want to apologize and wish you my condolences for that. I myself have lost a loved one. I lost my father actually 6 years and 3 days ago. So that's why I got into this business, and that's why I will always be in this business, and really glad to be back in Middle Tennessee working in suicide prevention. A couple of things, I've got a giant list, so I'm going to try to get through all of it in a reasonable amount of time. But there have been, unfortunately, 14 deaths of school-age children in Tennessee since August. That is statewide, of course, so Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, we cover it all. We have, to the best of our ability, responded to all 14 deaths. Unfortunately, a lot have been in West Tennessee. A few different risks of suicide. So before I tell you all these things, realize that everything I'm about to say is on that table out there. I've got my risk factors, all my warning signs, all your resources. They're on my table, please take them. Okay, but I'm gonna say them now. A few risk factors for suicide, a previous attempt. So if an individual has ever attempted suicide before, they are then at that higher risk of suicide. I do wanna punt to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So once again, please look that up if you've never heard of it. The state of Tennessee, the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth is doing wonderful work on getting that information out here in Tennessee specifically. But once you look at that, you'll see there's this kind of a scoring system. If you have a ACEs score of 4 or more, that individual is then at a 7-fold risk of eventually dying by suicide than the average population. So that's 7 times that risk. A few other risk factors are family history. Unfortunately, it can be a risk factor for suicide, substance abuse, different things we've mentioned up here. Throughout these different, so bullying, there's all that connection, unfortunately. Trauma always is going to be a risk factor for lots of different things. Different warning signs you can look for, listen for, notice perhaps. Once again, remember, everything I'm saying is on that table and on our website, okay? Talking or writing about death, dying, or even mentioning suicide. Displaying dramatic mood changes. I often say when I do trainings across the state that I don't care what normal is. I don't know what societal norm is, I don't care, right? If there's a dramatic change from that individual's norm, that can be a warning sign. Whether usually very happy, and then they become depressed. Or the opposite. If they're generally quite depressed, they're kind of down, they're introverted, and then they sort of reach out, maybe act out, whatever that might look like, okay? Giving away prized possessions, that's another big one. I've heard, unfortunately, of 7, 8, 9-year-olds giving away iPads, iPhones, whatever thing they like, right? 16-year-olds giving away driver's license. I've heard of that more than once, unfortunately. And of course, this runs the gamut. This is the warning sign that I have found, unfortunately, that all age groups, all demographics, right? And realizing that suicide is not a demographic issue. It's not, there are no demographics with suicide. As I said, that 14 that we've lost since August, and that number does tend to increase as spring comes around, unfortunately. Different resources though. So I'm a resources freak. I know I've said resources 5 times, and I'll say it 5 more times, right? I want you all to pull out your phone. I'm not kidding. Thank you. I got you. Come on. In your phone, add it to your contacts, right? I can't tell you what to call it. It's your phone. You call the contact what you want to call it, right? But enter 1-800-273-8255. Once more, 1-800-273-8255. That is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. You can call that number anytime, 24/7, 365. A trained counselor, crisis professional will answer that phone. Now, when I walk into a room and I talk about suicide prevention, people think the resources I'm giving them are only for suicide. That's not the case. That's a crisis line. Any crisis, anyone at any time might be experiencing, they can call that number, okay? Once again, put it in your contacts, call it what you want. That's your business. It's your phone, right? I'm just telling you what you do with your phone. Also, another, besides that lifeline, the text line. So it is a more recent development, and I'm a texter myself. I call my mother, and that's the only person I actually talk to on the phone. But if you text TN, we live in the state of Tennessee, right? TN to 741-741. Once again, text TN to 741-741. Just like the lifeline number, it will be answered via text, 24/7, 365, by a trained crisis counselor. I also want to draw your attention to one other resource that is actually new and in Williamson County. Because we have so many good resources, especially here in Middle Tennessee, they've actually worked to create, and it's actually Family and Children's Services have created this, a survivor of suicide loss support group for teens. There's one for adults in Nashville. There's one for adults in Columbia. But the teen group in Williamson County, is actually the Williamson County YMCA, is the only one in the state that focuses on youth who have lost a loved one to suicide. I have this brochure, obviously, in my hand, right? There are more on the table, and for those of you that are interested, I want to give you the phone number that you can call to be like, hey, I'm interested, when is it, where is it, give me those particulars. It's 615-244-7444. Once again, 615-244-7444. And real quick, as we've talked about technology, there was a recent study that came out 2 weeks ago, I believe, that actually shows a correlation between increased technology use and increased suicides in our youth. The more, especially male teens, male youth, who spend more time on a computer, on a cell phone, on an electronic device, technology in general, have a higher risk of suicide and are dying more so because of this. So that technology and that social media, it's a real thing. We feel it, we see it, but there's now actually been a study that, I didn't do that, that was not me. Yeah, that's all I got.
I'm trying. Okay. Will and Stacey from Rolling Hills, will you talk some for the parents at what point they should seek an assessment, and if you could walk us through that assessment process and what would merit hospitalization?
Well, first off, it can be extremely scary, and this we know. When that moment comes, if that moment comes, hopefully you won't find that yourself in that moment. But if you are, it can be extremely scary to be told, oh, you need to go to the hospital and get an assessment. We hope you find yourself not scared. What our efforts are, and is not to hospitalize necessarily. Our goal is to, like we talked in the beginning, is early intervention. So a lot of times the discussion is simply what has been tried before, okay? Sometimes the recommendations are, can family, kid go home with outpatient therapy, with a good safety plan in place? What do we need to do to make sure everybody's safe and can get through to the next appointment, to the next school day, until everybody can reconvene. Sometimes it's appropriate to just have a child come back for outpatient services. Ourselves and some of the other hospitals have intensive outpatient, which is usually a few nights a week, where there's group therapy. And our specific program has a family night, because we really want to incorporate the family. But sometimes that's what's appropriate. It doesn't always mean hospitalization. Hospitalization is intense, obviously. It's taking your child out of the home, out of the school for an extended period of time. So we don't necessarily do that unless it really is what is needed to ensure safety, for sure. That's the whole point of the assessment. So just know that when you come in for an assessment, that's really where the discussion is coming from. We want to make sure that everybody is safe for the duration. And when you decide to come in for an assessment, whether it be school counselors are referring, STARS, whoever it might be, the process is really easy. Will's gonna take a chance to talk about that.
So when you come in, we'll assess both parties separately. And I think that's really key, because a lot of times a child won't tell the parent everything that's going on. And I think separating the parties and to paint the full picture. But for the state of Tennessee recognizes 16-year-olds to be able to consent for treatment. We want everyone that comes to the hospital, if they have criteria to stay at the hospital, we want them to sign in voluntarily. We want the parents on board with them having to stay at the hospital and making them comfortable with the process. So to answer any questions that parents may have when they come in, all that's done separately from the child, because they're trying to get the parents' perspective on what's going on and see if the child is actually telling the truth, or maybe just expanding upon some of the criteria that brought them into the hospital in general. But once those conversations are had, both parties are brought together, and then the best decision is made for the safety of the patient. Again, the last thing we ever want to do is have to hospitalize somebody or have someone stay at the hospital, and it's only done for safety. So to get both parties on board with just the act of having to stay at the hospital, I think a lot of times parties will show up to the hospital just expecting to talk to somebody and then leave. And sometimes they may get upset that there may be criteria to have the patient stay at the hospital, and they weren't expecting that. They didn't bring any clothes. They had cheerleading practice later on in the evening to do, and just to even just wrap your head around having to have your child stay in a psychiatric facility. I think a lot of times people's perception of a psychiatric environment is really scary. So just getting over just that in general and getting comfortable with the process. But we want parents, to have to stay at the hospital, to look at it like it is just a speed bump. It's hard sometimes, but when I ever saw someone coming into the hospital, I never wanted to see someone come to the hospital. If we did, we wanted to see them one time. We wanted to get something out of the programming, to not necessarily fix what's going on, but at least keep them safe enough to start the communication process with outpatient providers and some of those things for the long-term success. Because to think about having to stay at the hospital, it's such a short-term process, thinking that it's 3 to 7 days normally. It can be longer for some. Some, adolescents that come in, it's a home issue, or maybe they're in state's custody where they're having to find residential treatment programs because, again, satisfying the Maslow hierarchy of needs, they don't have any safety at home. So finding some alternative placement things may take a little bit longer in the process. But on average, it stays about a week. So to think about, it is a speed bump to think about, 3 weeks from now or a month from now. That it may just be on a blip on the radar. But if people have to come into the hospital, we want to see them one time. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to never see anybody. But if we have to see you, we want to see you one time. We want to set you up with a great outpatient provider to continue your success outside the hospital. When you're looking at an assessment, it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anywhere, whether you come to our facility or go to Vanderbilt or go to Skyline or go to Trust Point or go somewhere out of the middle region. It doesn't cost you anything to get an assessment. And every facility is going to treat it the exact same way. They want to keep the person safe. And if staying at the hospital is going to do that, then that's the route we're going to take. But sometimes having to stay at the hospital could be traumatizing for someone. If they've never been to the hospital and they're not acute enough to necessarily have to be in a locked environment, monitored 24 hours a day, that may do more harm than good. So all of those options would be on the table when the assessment's made. To determine what's the best fit. If you're a good fit, like Stacy talked about, an IOP program, which would be 3 nights out of the week in conjunction with your regular outpatient therapy that you get. It's not that wasn't working. It's like, no, you just needed more. You needed that and you needed this. So that would be an option. But again, all those things are discussed with you. And again, the decisions made are what's going to be most beneficial for the patient, whether it's an adolescent or an adult. And they're licensed professionals that are doing the assessments just like they're seeing on an outpatient basis, whether they're licensed or they're working through their licensure, getting supervision hours. We're all professionals, and to make the best decision for the patient, is on everybody's mind, whether that's the therapist doing the assessment or the parents. We want to get them on board with the treatment. Again, it's about what's beneficial for them in the long run. But when you look at having to stay at the hospital, they're looking at immediate crisis criteria. Now, whether you were suicidal last week or even suicidal the couple of days before you came to the hospital, all those things are taken into consideration. But when they're looking at immediate crisis criteria, you are a danger to yourself or others. And you're not going to be safe unless you're at the facility monitored by professionals on a 24-hour basis. So whether you have that immediate crisis criteria or not, that's what's going to determine whether you stay or not. When you were looking at suicide risk factors that she was talking about a little bit earlier, withdrawing from school activities, withdrawing from friends, just acting different. Parents, you should know your kids. You should know when they're not acting their same behavior. So when things are out of the norm and you are not having some of those conversations that you should be having about, hey, what's going on with you? You're acting differently, and some of those things, and to notice some of those things, to think that, okay, well, you're not acting right, you're not really talking to me, let's go talk to a professional and find out what's going on. Because if you're not comfortable talking to me, I want you to be able to at least talk to somebody else. And that's the ultimate goal, is just to open up the lines of communication. And again, we, just like all facilities, we want the best for the client. And whether we're a good fit or not, please go somewhere else. I was always quick, I took crisis calls for several years at the hospital from the community. And I was quick to tell you, if we're not a good fit, let me give you a number to somewhere else. Go somewhere else, and take advantage of some of those options, because in mental health, it's about having options. And we want the best for everyone. But again, to think that someone has to stay at the hospital, they're going to look at immediate crisis criteria. They're not safe unless they're here, where they can be monitored on a 24-hour basis. See the doctor every day, start some medications if that's an option, but some of those things. But that's what they're going to look to see if someone needs to stay at the hospital.
In closing, before we even have time to take questions and answers, it's just important to reiterate, guys, some of our kids are hurting. Some of our kids are hurting badly. And they're not gonna always know how to deal with those feelings. And sometimes we parents think we understand the struggle. I'm here to tell you, being a teenager nowadays versus when we were teenagers, completely different. And sometimes we're telling our kids, yeah, we've been bullied, or we get it and we understand it. Some of us parents do, and some of us parents don't. I mean, as a school social worker, just when I talk to some kids, I'm sitting here having to check myself as a parent, because things are just different for our kiddos. And some things are more intense and harder for them to get through. And so it's just so important for me, for them to understand that they do not have to go through this alone. That's why we're all here today, to show them and to help them understand that they do not have to go through this alone. And when I do have an opportunity to speak with kids, we're so quick to talk about physical health. I talk about mental health. We talk about eating right and working out. Well, let's talk about thinking right. We talk about eating good, let's talk about thinking good. And so my daughter had a stroke, and when she had a stroke, she couldn't use her hand or feet or any of that stuff. Not because her hand or feet were broken, but because something happened with her brain. So that's why I'm a big advocate of mental health, because a person's thoughts are going to trigger their feelings, and it's going to trigger their actions. And so if we're not thinking right, if we don't have our thoughts in check, then our actions are not going to be in check. So that's why I'm always trying to get kids to just think about, if there's bullying, if there's anxiety, whatever is going on with you, whatever is happening to you, how are you defining it? What does it mean? And I always use this quick analogy with some students, like, let's say I travel from Murfreesboro, so 840 has become a nightmare. And so sometimes people drive like they're crazy. And so I had a guy just bobbing and weaving in and out of traffic, and so I could just really let that get to me. And so if I let that get to me the beginning of the day, by lunchtime, I'm still thinking about that man. That man is going on about his business, out of town or at his job. I'm sitting up here thinking about, how dare that man just cut me off. And then when it's time to go home, that man better not be on the road. I'm still fixated on the thought of this man cutting me off, and it's over. But when I redefine what that means, because so many times when something happens to a kid, they're saying, what did I do wrong? And we have to realize sometimes we're not responsible for other people's actions. I did not tell you to bully me. I did not tell you to hurt my feelings. So I have to separate myself from it and not take ownership on that. And sometimes we have to learn to respond and not react to things. So when we learn how to respond, we're able to separate ourselves and say, you know what, something's wrong. Maybe that kid just had a bad day. It has nothing to do with me. And so when I deal with the little driving situations, I'm like, okay, maybe that person's wife is in labor and they're speeding a little bit, or maybe that person has to get to the bathroom as quickly as possible. Maybe I speed. Don't speed. Just saying. Use this as an analogy, right? So, but I'm able to separate myself to where I'm not taking ownership of this. So it's really, really important to redirect our thoughts and redefine what things mean to us in order to help our kids move forward past some of the unfortunate things. Because, high school, middle school, even elementary school for that matter, it can be kind of a tough place sometimes. So it's just important that we keep our kids' brains and their minds in check at home, and we're definitely going to do our part at school as well. So I just appreciate all of you guys for being here. I appreciate you all for being here, because this is something that we definitely need to discuss, and I think this is something that is very, very important for our kids.
Okay, I know we've kept you, and I want to respect the time of the panel, but I would like for you to ask a couple of questions if you have them. I know we've thrown a lot of information out at you, and so you may just need time to process that, and that's okay too. But does anybody have a pressing question that they would like to ask the panel?